In the past, I've completed pellet tests in both .22 and .177 calibers, and the results were very interesting. And I looked at the accuracy of a whole host of different pellets. Well, I thought it was time to revisit this, but this time concentrate on hunting pellets and look not only at the accuracy, but the penetration, deformation, and the effect different power guns have on them. But first, we're going to need some ballistic gel for the penetration testing.
Hello and welcome to Mrs. AAR on Air. We're looking at ballistic gel, which can be pretty expensive stuff, but you can make a homemade version. Is it hard to do? Well, all you need is gelatin and water, and of course a container to set it in, ideally rectangular, quite deep. Gelatin has a bloom rating, and you need a bloom value of around 250 to get a decent consistency for ballistic gel. The amounts I've used are around 160 grams of gelatin to 1 litre of water. So, step 1, decide how much you want to make. Measure out the volume of cold water in a heat-proof or microwavable container, not necessarily the one that you're going to use to set the gel in. Stir the gelatin into the cold water. It will have the consistency of a sauce. Put this into the fridge and just let it soak for about half an hour. It will end up cloudy and set, but quite crumbly. Next, you need to fully dissolve the gelatin by putting the bowl over a pan of boiling water until it's become totally liquid. Stir it gently to make sure it's fully dissolved. You can do this in a microwave. Put it on full power at 30-second bursts at a time until it's fully liquid. Also, prepare the container that you're going to set it in by rubbing a little oil or butter around the inside. This will help you get the gel out when it's ready. Once liquid, gently pour it into the final container. Don't stir or do anything more with it at this point. You don't want it full of ripples or bubbles. Put it into the fridge or a cold place and leave it to cool for around 12 hours. Ideally, leave it overnight. Turn it out and there you go. Go and have some fun. Now, as mentioned, ballistic gel can be pretty expensive, but with this homemade version, you can chop up the used gel, don't forget to remove the lead content, melt it down over a pan or in the microwave just as described already. Pour back into the mould, reset it, and off you go again. One important point with gelatin, it is edible. But if you use a microwave to dissolve it, I've been told that it alters its chemical makeup so it can become toxic. It's no longer fit for consumption. So, let's have a look. Here's the remoulded, reset version that we did. And here's the brand new fresh batch.
Blimey, the missus is taking over. But it must be said the ballistic gel she cooked up works a treat and was really dense. This has been a big project, and whilst it doesn't cover all pellets, it has been a full-on job to try and discover the real usability and effect of hunting pellets. So I've lined up the following pellets, starting with a basic Diablo, the Stalwart JSB Exact, which is a pretty good representation of a standard quality pellet. The new JSB Hades, some Air Arms Diablo Hunters, then a trio from H&N, Sniper Magnum, Barracuda Hunter Extreme and the Barracuda Hunter. Then I got out some Predator Polymag shorts, JSB Stratton Jumbo and finally the JSB Ultrashock. With a name like that, there has to be some high expectations. And I'm mainly going to be using the following guns. In 2.2, the Daystate Pulsar, the Air Arms S410 and the Daystate Regal in FAC. And after the tests, we're going to try and bust a couple of myths too. So, stick around for that later. Now, as always, someone is going to complain because I didn't use this pellet or that pellet in a specific combination of gun and pellet. But if I used every pellet in every calibre in every gun, the programme would last about 4 days. So, it's not happening. But I have tried to choose pellets that claim to be Destructor or Hunter pellets and compared them against a standard benchmark Diablo. For a Hunter pellet, the requirement has got to be accuracy initially, but they also need to achieve more deformation or deformation than penetration. I'll look at .22 calibre today and we'll revisit 177 at a later date, because this has turned out to be quite in-depth. I'm going to start with sub 12 foot-pound power and target work. It's the grouping that we're interested in here to check the consistency. All these pellets were shot through different guns, and the results here are pretty representative of what accuracy can be expected. The weather conditions were pretty miserable, and I'm not a full-on target shooter, remember. Outdoor at 40 metres, cameras under cover from the wet. Firstly, standard JSB Diablo. Quite a favourite of mine, and they seem to suit most of my guns. As I suspected, pretty accurate, and have pulled much tighter groups from these on a regular basis in the past. The Hades. Again, nice tight groups and well usable for hunting. I've grown to like these a lot. The Air Arms, again, normally a pretty good pellet, and I believe made by JSB as well. They do seem to suit my Air Arms rifle better than the Daystake though, but good enough results. The first of the H&Ns, the Super Magnums. I shot these several times and with different guns, and they were fair, but nothing amazing. Practice may help get used to them. Then the H&N Barracuda Hunter Extreme. Now, I shot these several times, and initially they were awful. Again, I eventually got them to group better, but they took a fair bit of patience and settling in. Then the H&N Barracuda Hunters. Well, I don't care how much I practiced with these and which gun I used, it was really struggling to get them to group, and they had a tendency to go where they wanted to. Maybe they'll do better in the FAC gun later. Predator Polymags. Well, those were everywhere at one time and almost felt like form over function, and were more desirable for the look rather than their ability. But that said, they weren't as bad as I thought they were going to be, but not amazing at all. So, JSB Stratton Jumbo. Not sure why they call them Jumbo, because they're only a 15.89 grain pellet. Again, nothing to write home about, certainly not in my hands and in my guns. Finally, the rather bizarre looking JSB Ultra Shock, the pellet that looks the same front or back, and the real shock part is just how wayward they wanted to go. I wouldn't use these for anything other than very close-up work, because over 40 metres they didn't cut the mustard, so to speak. Whilst trying to zero the scope in with these, I thought shooting on the big 9 target was going to be a bad idea, so I shot them at a separate target all of their own instead. And the fact that the Barracuda Hunters had already put holes in that target anyway. So, from here I would probably only choose the first 5 from the 9. With the target work done, it was off to the workshop for the ballistic gel setup. I was using some higher speed cameras and they need a heck of a lot of light. Not easy on an English November day. Firstly, the sub 12 foot-pound results. The penetration was pretty good on all of them really, with a neat entry hole and some shock damage as they entered. The JSB Exact made a depth of 150mm or about 6 inches. Made a neat entry and route through the gel, stopping and showing very little deformation. The Hades stopped about 40mm shorter, or about 1.5 inches, and showed signs of starting to deform, and left more shock and damage to the gel behind it. The air arms made about 5.5 inches, or 130mm, and despite of stopping shorter, showed similar damage as to the JSB Exact, and little or no deformation. The Sniper Magnum was almost identical to the JSB Exact in distance and damage, and again didn't deform. The H&N Barracuda Hunter Extreme matched the air arms in distance and damage, but again didn't deform. The Barracuda Hunter did show less penetration and started to show signs of deforming, but nothing amazing. The Predator Polymags did stop in the shortest distance, and on its way it even managed to turn itself through 180 degrees, naturally doing more internal damage. The JSB Stratton Jumbo matched the air arms, not surprisingly, as they are pretty much identical pellets. And finally, the Ultrashock came in noticeably average, with a depth of 5 inches, straight paths through the gel, little internal damage, and didn't deform at all. So, from these results we can see a difference in penetration and the signs of some deformation starting. So what if we put the same pellet into a 40 foot-pound FAC rifle? Will these pellets behave differently? Well, let's put them to the target test first. 40-metre range. JSB Exact, as always, pretty consistent and very usable. The JSB Hades also started pretty accurate and consistent, and I would recommend, and in fact do use these in my hunting rifle. The air arms did let me down a little, which was a surprise. Sadly, I don't have an inexhaustible supply of 40 foot-pound air rifles to put these through, but would suspect they would suit an air arms gun better. The H&N Sniper Magnums didn't over-impress either, but maybe practice, familiarity and even a different gun and barrel may see them improve. As for the H&N Barracuda Hunter Extreme, well, less said, soonest mended, shall we say. In other words, nah. And as for the H&N Hunters, I wasn't overly impressed with them either. Again, maybe a different gun or barrel. The Predator Polymags did surprise me yet again, and whilst not as accurate as some of the pellets here, with practice they could prove quite capable. JSB Stratton Jumbos. Really? And no shock about the Ultra Shocks. That again proved to be ultra shocking. Well, there are some clear winners here. Let's put them all into the gel again, shall we? The JSB Exact, not really known for its deformation characteristics, tried to make a break for it and reached all the way to the end of the gel, some 10 inches, which is a bit of a surprise really, because we're putting out about 3.5 times as much power from the FAC gun and not even doubling the distance travelled. It did, however, show shock waves in the material, representing internal damage as that energy was dispersed into the material. The JSB Hades really did show its capability and strength here, still only going to a depth of 150mm or 6 inches, and tried to turn itself inside out, leaving some serious damage behind it. The air arms travelled approximately 230mm or 9 inches, but didn't show any real signs of deforming. but did dump a lot of its energy early in the penetration, causing shock damage. The Sniper Magnum simply went all the way through 10 inches or 260 millimeters of gel and embedded itself into the next piece of gel, maintaining its shape completely, but did cause a fair amount of shock damage around the entry point. The H&N Extreme Hunters stopped short of the 5-inch or 120mm mark, left huge shock damage behind itself and deformed to an unrecognisable shape. Pretty impressive. The H&N Hunter also folded itself inside out after travelling only 3 inches or 75mm into the gel, again leaving huge shock damage behind itself. Then the funky Polymag's turn. Again, initial shock damage into a depth of about 7 inches or 175mm and deformed to the point it finished up in 3 parts. The skirt, which was unrecognisable, the squash main body and the point. Pretty good results. But if you're shooting something to eat, you will need to remember to dig out all the bits before cooking. Next was the Stratton, which achieved a depth of about 9 inches or 230mm and whilst leaving shock damage was pretty much maintained the shape it went in with. Finally, the Ultrashock, which in its defence stopped at about 7.5 inches or 190mm, left quite an unshocked route of travel in the gel and did deform on its end a fair bit, probably ending up double the diameter it went in at. From this lot, there are a couple of takeaways to my mind. Firstly, the FAC rifle doesn't carry as much energy in terms of distance once in the target as I would have thought it would have done. And secondly, and more importantly, this is the level of power that is required to activate the deforming characteristics of most of these hunting pellets. So the conclusion from this all has to be, if you're shooting in sub 12 foot-pounds, as always, concentrate primarily on a pellet that will give you the best possible accuracy results, first and foremost. Because to get any pellet to even start to deform, first you need to hit the darn thing, in which case probably a standard Diablo from a quality manufacturer is what you need. Don't buy cheap, you'll regret it, I promise you. And when the 177 version of this comes out, you'll see why. The kill zone is still the most important to get the clean dispatch. You could try the Hades pellets from JSB and get that accuracy and start to benefit from the deforming characteristics. Or if you can keep the accuracy of them in your gun, then try the Polymags. But some magazines don't like them and you will need to source the shorter versions. Other than that, I personally don't see the point in confusing things with any of the other fancy pellet types. In the 40 foot-pound FAC guns, though, that starts to become a different story, and there were 4 very clear winners in the deforming category: the Hades, Hunter Extreme, Hunter and Polymags. That quickly narrows down to 3 if you're shooting at longer distances, making the Hunter Extremes a loser in this category. Out of the final 3, I would probably go for the Polymags or the Hades. Now, before anyone suggests I'm in the pocket of this manufacturer or that supplier, think again. I bought all of these pellets out of my own money for these tests. And with the amount of pellets I get through, I would love someone to supply me with them. But that isn't the case, sadly. These, of course, are purely my findings. Some people would claim that the accuracy is not as important in close verming hunting, and the more deforming of the pellet and the lack of travel would be an advantage to prevent the pellet going through the quarry and causing damage to the surrounding barn or the like, in which case I would argue that you don't need an FAC gun, in which case most all pellets will do, as there is little or no deforming characteristics anyway. Sadly, these may not be the results you or I were looking for, but very informative results. Now, I can't help feeling the manufacturers make these fancy pellets for higher power rifles and not sub 12 foot-pound UK stuff, because they evidently need more power to activate them. Like I said, this isn't a full list of pellets, etc. by any means, but if you want to let me know any pellets you want me to try and test out, then if I get enough requests and I can get hold of the pellets, I'm quite prepared to put another one of these together if there is the desire. I've also completed a full test of 9 lots of 177 pellets to see what the effect is in the lower calibre, again in sub 12 foot-pounds and FAC rifles. The results from this test will be released later. Now then, that promise I made earlier. I'm often reminded in the comments section about how airguns are just toys and not real guns, and there is often a waft in the air of testosterone when these comments are left. And you know what? I would be the first to admit they have nowhere near the power of real guns. But Hollywood shows that cops and good guys hiding behind random car doors whilst returning fire on the bad guys, and they never get hurt. Well, I've built and designed cars, so I thought I would put it to the test with a sub 12 foot-pound airgun. I shot it at the same piece of metal that a car door is made of. Well, would you believe it? Straight through. I was preparing to shoot an FAC full power air rifle at it, but I didn't need to. So how come the toy guns go through where an AK-47 hardly leaves a scratch? Now this had me thinking. When the same good guys are in a house and they hide behind a dividing wall, they're still unharmed. So I shot a 12 foot-pound airgun at a simulated studded wall, found in most houses for internal walls. And guess what? Yep, straight through. And if you shot a 40 foot-pound one, it went through the equivalent of more than 3 walls. I left the 100 foot-pound one in the gun cabinet. I thought the point had been proven. I suspect poetic license is playing a part in Hollywood. Not a problem, unless people actually start to believe it. Hopefully this has been informative for newbies and seasoned shooters alike. Please stay safe and thanks for watching.